The county jail was on a level of filth and terror that I never knew existed. Before I was arrested, I did not understand or even know the word dehumanization. I was treated in such a way that I was made to feel non-human, like meat in a butcher shop, or like a shoe on an assembly line. Of course, no one explained anything. I was commanded to stand here, go over there, sit on that chair until you're called. The cops would talk to me. Some would joke and make light of this insane thing they were doing to me. Other cops would make comments, but they were so far removed from the reality of the situation it was like they were robots. When they physically handled me, which they did often, they would only do so while wearing thick latex gloves, like I'm a leper or something. After I was sufficiently handled, photographed, fingerprinted, and humiliated, I was then locked in a tiny cage. Before this experience, I never really thought about our system of behavior modification. My life had never come in contact with the jail or the criminal system in any way. I didn't even know anyone who had ever been arrested. I grew up here and was subjected to a very pop culture perspective of jail and the court process. I think my pre-arrest point of view was fairly mainstream and typical. I knew that jail and prison were very ugly places, but I thought that's exactly what they're supposed to be. And I thought that, for the most part, the people who get caught up in the system deserve to be there. I never questioned our system. I never had any reason to. The logic seemed simple. All you have to do is follow the rules, right? I lived a full and busy life. My thoughts were occupied with taking care of responsibilities, paying bills, and trying to get ahead in life. I didn't have much time to consider the thousands of human lives that are being held in captivity right here in my hometown. I operated on a few basic assumptions. One, that the legal system is mostly fair and at least tries to be right. Two, that the people who get caught up by the system did something to get themselves there. Even if they were wrongfully convicted, they must have done something to have gotten themselves there. 3, that our laws are not perfect, but they try and are for the most part right. And finally, that the punishments issued by our system are mostly fair and just and corrective. In essence, I understood that the system doesn't always get it right, but for the most part I thought it serves the purpose that the taxpayers are paying for it to serve. At times in my life, I have seen people attempting to fight the system. Typically, my reaction was to distance myself from the situation, and I was dismissive. I've always been uncomfortable with confrontation. People who were fighting against the government seemed kind of kooky and bitter. I felt like there was something strange about them. I can't ever remember a time in my earlier years where I thought, the government may be wrong, and that guy may have a good reason to be angry and fed up. When I witnessed someone who was confronting the authority, it caused me to withdraw and dismiss the person as a troublemaker. It seemed that the person who fought against the system only appeared guilty. After I was sufficiently processed, I was just dumped into this little cell with a toilet and a metal bed. Again, nothing was ever explained to me. I had no idea what was going on. I was just watching all of this happen to me. It was really odd to go from the chaos of the booking facility to the confines of this claustrophobic space. When the huge metal door slammed shut for the first time, I stood there in silence for a few moments. Then I burst into tears. I don't mean I cried. I sobbed. What the fuck? Jail smells weird. It smells rotten. I spent a total of 5 months in the county jail waiting for the lawyers to decide what they wanted to do to me. I spent the first couple of weeks on the 5th floor of a downtown jail facility. I was confined to my cell for 23 hours a day. I was only let out to go get a tray of food and take it back to my cell 3 times a day. The food served was not food. I remember at one point looking at my tray and I saw what was supposed to be a brownie. I took a big bite with anticipation. Then I spit it out. I gave the rest of the tray to my neighbor. I did not eat for several days. Eventually, I had to eat. A guard came and woke me up in the middle of the night. He told me to gather everything out of my cell and come out to his little station in the cell block. He offered no explanation. I thought maybe I had been bailed out. I was directed down elevators, then through corridors and into a big room. I was put into handcuffs and leg chains. Then I was put in the back of a box van. I was being transferred somewhere. After about a 45-minute drive, I was unloaded and unchained. I was given a couple of blankets and guided down a long hallway. I was told to go into a room that looked like a school cafeteria or something. I was told that once I went in there, I was to go to the officer's podium and await instructions. Everything was strange and eerily quiet. I had no idea where I was or why I was there. A guard appeared from behind a door. He pointed in a direction and said, "You're number 61. I slowly and with great confusion started walking in the direction he pointed, while at the same time trying to figure out what he meant. This was a fairly large room, and there were short concrete block walls about 3 or 4 feet high around the perimeter of the room. After a few steps, I realized that there were people sleeping on bunks on the other side of these concrete partition walls. There were a lot of people sleeping in here. I had always thought jail was like what you see on TV. I thought a jail was a building full of cells with metal bars and 2 guys in each one of them. They call this place a dorm. I had no idea that this was even done. I guess it makes sense if you're in the business of containing humans. It's got to be much cheaper to do things mass production style. This is the Henry Ford approach to imprisonment, or maybe in more modern terms, it's like Sam's Club. It's the bulk approach to oppressing humans. God bless the American way. The next morning I discovered that I had been delivered directly to hell. There are around 87 men packed into this room. At night, when everyone was sleeping, my first impression was that this was a large room. After seeing things during the day, in full operation, I discovered that this was a very, very small room. I didn't sleep at all. When the people around me started waking up, they all wanted to know who I was and especially what I was being charged with. I told them I didn't know. I was brand new to the games played in captivity. All I knew was that my lawyer told me that absolutely under no circumstances should I tell anyone what I was charged with. Lawyers are a joke. They have no clue. How exactly am I supposed to pull that off? I had never been arrested before, never been to jail. I didn't know the lingo. I didn't know how to lie and sound convincing. I didn't know how to make up a cover story that fit my circumstances. The caged animals around me pick up on my weak stance right away. They could see that I didn't speak like a gangster or a drug dealer. I didn't immediately set to swapping war stories with old acquaintances like many of them did. I was square, which made them immediately suspicious. When they asked me directly, I tried to lie or change the subject. My lies were weak. They figured out what kind of charges I had. The dorm was chaos. There was only enough control or containment of the chaos to be just short of a riot. That's probably the best way to describe it. It was a contained and only slightly controlled riot. Every moment of every day. We were required to remain on our bunks at night while we slept, and for a short time before each meal to be counted. Otherwise, the dorm was open. That meant that for 11 hours a day, this place was pandemonium. Maybe one way I could describe this for you is like a lunch recess at a school cafeteria, only that kids are not kids, but instead fully grown and fully malfunctioning gorillas. The violence and the drama were very high. The stakes were life and death. There was one guard assigned to the 87-man dorm. While the dorm was open, the guard was most often not in the room, but instead in a control room. The control room was behind mirrored glass, so we could not see him. I know that much of the time he was not paying attention or could not see what was going on in the dorm because of how many fights or beatings took place without a guard showing up. About half the time a response team would show up, but only after things had played out. The response team mostly just supervised the prisoner orderlies as they cleaned up the blood. Most of the time I was in the county jail, I was locked into a room with 87 malfunctioning, pissed off knuckle-draggers, and there was no guard to be seen. For more than 3 months I was inclined to remain on my bunk. The room was so hostile and oppressive that I rarely ever got off my bunk. There were constant stares. There was never a moment when there was not a set of eyes watching me. There were constant comments, both direct to my face and indirect. These comments mostly included words like rapist, or rapo, weirdo, pervert, or molester. It didn't matter that none of them really knew what my charges were or anything about my story. They were hurt and rightfully angry about being locked in a cage and simply needed someone to take it out on. It was better to just stay on my bunk. The only thing that provided relief was books. Day after day, week after week, month after month, I hid in the pages of books. I thank the good people at the county library who were pumping in a steady supply of books. Many of the books had been badly abused and were missing pages or covers. They had been used as weapons, as hiding places, or used for smoking papers, or even as toilet paper. I read a constant stream of literature. I survived the county jail because of books. I read Hemingway, George Orwell, Steinbeck, Gandhi, Stephen Ambrose, Tom Robbins, Howard Zinn, Jack London, Jack Kerouac, and on and on. During the total of 5 months that I spent in the county jail, I read more pages than I had in the entirety of my life. I could finish a 300-page novel in a day, and I read every moment of every day. I rarely ever stopped reading. There were only a few occasions in which I would stop reading. I stopped reading to sleep. There was so much noise that at night my ears would ring. I found that it was better to sleep during the day and read at night, but even at night I had to tune out the constant snoring and farting, coughing, sneezing, and sleep talking. I had to teach myself to focus and tune out the constant and literally deafening noise. I also stopped reading to eat. The food hardly qualified as food. It was prepared by captives who no doubt added unspeakable ingredients out of maliciousness. For the first few weeks, I could not bring myself to eat this garbage, and I lost a bunch of weight. I was already lean before I went to jail. I learned that when a human becomes hungry enough, he will eat just about anything. I also stopped reading to take a shower, which I did reluctantly and with great fear. The bathroom is the least supervised area because there are no cameras. Many of the fights or beatings took place in the bathroom. The showers are also very unsanitary. For some reason, I don't know why, but it was common to find shit on the shower floors. I don't want to know why. In addition to this, the water would not maintain a constant temperature. It would always pulsate from lukewarm to freezing cold. The shower walls were dirty. The grout in the tile floor was disgusting. There was mold and mildew everywhere. I mostly felt more dirty after taking a shower. The unit guard would occasionally put on a pair of thick rubber gloves and perform random bunk searches. These guys treat us like we are infected with deadly disease. It's insulting, dehumanizing. Many of the men in here have been living on the streets. There is every kind of infectious disease in here, but where are my gloves? Where is my protection? I didn't have any diseases when I was put in here, but while you protect yourself, you force me to be subjected to who knows what kinds of things. Lice, scabies, hepatitis, MRSA, AIDS, you name it. There is officially a medical clinic here, but no real medical treatment is given. It's more like a triage unit. Major medical issues are given a band-aid, and the captive is then returned to regular confinement. Living in the county jail was not only terrifying and traumatic, it was also an eye-opening experience. It quickly became clear to me that this system is a trap. Most of the men in here have been caught in the system their whole lives. The younger a person is when the system first labels them a criminal, the more likely they are to spend their whole lives in and out of this system. This is not because the person has a rotten core, but because they are placed in such a deficit that they can never dig their way out. The system is set up so that known criminals can more easily be caught and recaptured. The program does not correct, it continuously sets these poor souls up to fail. The jail is full. It's brimming with repeat visitors. Most were there on parole violations. Many are addicts who receive no real drug treatment. Many are homeless. There are very few first-timers and even fewer middle-aged first-timers like me. For the most part, jail is just a regular part of life for these guys. Jail is the only option this culture offers these damaged and sick humans. Captivity provides a place to come down from being high for weeks. It provides a relatively comfortable, warm, dry bed and 3 meals a day for the homeless. Many commit small fines in order to deliberately get themselves into the jail, just for a couple of nights. This is especially true in the winter months. When they are released, they go right back to the only life they have ever known how to live. The system offers them no healing and no path to a better life. Amongst the parole violators and addicts and homeless, there is also the pimps, the gangbangers, hustlers, drug dealers, thugs, abusers, conmen, and victimizers. These are the survivors who were born into the very bottom of the social pyramid. They are the children of addicts and abusers and hustlers and gangsters. They were born into crazy circumstances, and they learned to cling to life by employing the only tools and skills their environment taught them. They are the products of this society. These are the most broken, emotionally immature, and damaged humans, all rounded up and thrown into this room together. This is not a place of rehabilitation or corrective healing. This is a place where the survivors of capitalism network and learn new scams, new hustles, and survival tactics from each other. It's like a state-run convention for dealers, exploiters, and hustlers. In the time I spent in the county jail, I watched the same characters leave and then return. Every day was filled with gangster reunions and updates on the latest hustles. I learned about pimping and how prostitution works. I watched as new relationships were established in the drug trade and old connections reestablished. I witnessed dealers solicit the room, finding sources for the cheapest or the best quality meth, heroin, cocaine, you name it. Make no mistake, your system does not reduce or prevent crime. It does not make a criminally inclined man fearful of the law. These guys most often embrace jail time as a badge of honor. They thrive here. Jail time is a part of their lifestyle. Jail does not prevent crime. It promotes, even glorifies it. The culture within the penal system is allowed to be controlled by the captives. With only the slightest effort, the administrators could mandate a culture of growth and healing and true behavior modification. Jails and prisons could be anything that the people who make and run them wanted them to be. It could be a place of education and mentorship and healthy relationship skills. But instead, they are exactly what they're made to be. No real effort is made to help these people be better, healthier human beings. It's clearly not in the best interest of those who make their living from the penal system to ensure that their customers don't come back. The good guys need the bad guys, or else they'd be out of a job. Within the system, gangs and gang politics are allowed to run the show. I have seen the guards choose to not intervene so that the gang culture could work out its own issues. As a result, gang activity is very established and organized and powerful. A great deal of gang activity on the streets of America is directed by shot callers from the inside of prison. The culture within the prison system drives the criminal culture on your streets. In jail, violence is a part of daily life. There were many, many fights. Fights were a natural result of the tension created by locking so many humans in such a small space. There is always a heavy tension in the air. Tension was ignited into physical aggression over the slightest provocation. There were gang rivalries, unpaid gambling debts, food trades gone bad, race tensions, or just to make a point to a rat or a sex offender. Many jail fights are better described as jumpings. While sex offender and rats are openly shamed, there is no shame in knocking someone out from behind. You have to always watch your back. The guards were slow to catch on or respond to fights. Many times punches were thrown so fast and it would be over before the guards ever knew it happened. It was common for other prisoners to distract the guard to prevent him from becoming aware of a fight in the bathroom. Other times, two willing participants would go fight it out in a cleaning closet. The loser had to exit second with his hands clasped and his head down to show his defeat to everyone else. I witnessed so much violence in jail. I saw noses and jaws broken. I saw the bones of a man's eye socket crushed. One day I was on my bunk reading and two rival gangbangers nearly landed on top of me. I jumped over the concrete wall in my socks just as they tumbled onto my bunk. I was choked and gagged by the pepper spray used to break them up. Violence was everywhere. It was a constant threat. Early one morning around 5 a.m. I woke to the distinct sound of a fight. I was half asleep, so it took a moment to get my wits about me and register what I was seeing. I thought it was just another fight, but as things came into focus over the concrete wall, I realized that the unit guard was being severely beaten by a prisoner. The fight had been going on for several minutes before I looked over the wall. By the time I saw what was going on, the guard was no longer defending himself. As the guard's head was being smashed into the concrete wall, another prisoner ran over and warned the guy to stop before he killed the guard. It must have taken 15 minutes or more from the time it started to the time the incident response team rushed into the room. The prisoner was hauled off. I heard that the prisoner was being sent to court that morning and was facing a life sentence. The guard had been harassing him for being slow to get ready to go to court. The prisoner had had enough and felt he had nothing to lose. The guard reportedly survived, but I never saw him on the unit again. Shortly after this incident, the dorm I had lived in for 3 months was cleared out. All prisoners were sent to other units. A few hours after entering a new dorm, several men had approached me wanting to know what my charges were. Not much later, I was approached by a short, angry little man. As he addressed me, I suddenly realized that I was surrounded by 6 other dudes. They had waited until the guard stepped out of the room. The short and angry man wanted to know my charges. I said, "What difference does it make to you?" He said, "We can't have rapists running around freely in this dorm." I was shaking, but I tried not to show my fear. Another guy said, "Look, man, we all have wives and daughters and sisters." I considered my options. I thought maybe I could take one of them out, or even 2 if I made the first move. I made myself ready to aim the palm of my hand into the short guy's nose. If I could break his nose right away, maybe I could take him out of the equation. Then I was going to have to deal with the rest of them. I figured maybe at least 1 or 2 of them would take off to avoid getting in trouble. I was petrified. I didn't know what to do. There were guys all the way around me. I couldn't keep my eyes on all of them, especially the ones directly behind me. I expected to get hit from behind at any moment. I'm a healthy and athletic guy. I spent my teenage years wrestling at a high level. I'm confident, but I don't stand a chance against 6 guys. Then the first guy said I was going to have to PC up. That's protective custody. Or else the next time I went into the bathroom, I was going to get jumped. Then I understood that they were not going to jump me right there, that this was only a warning. I didn't know how to handle this situation. I have never felt so powerless. I was overwhelmed with anger. There was a big part of me that wanted to start swinging, but I knew that if I got into a fight, even defending myself, I would likely receive assault charges in addition to my current legal mess. Eventually, the crowd around me slowly dispersed with several warnings. I went to my bunk and thought about this situation. I was brimming with anger. I didn't want to fold to these children. Eventually, I decided to approach the guard and report the situation. At first, the guard was apathetic. He didn't care. I didn't think he was going to do anything. It took some persuasion. But finally, I was moved to solitary confinement. I was locked in a cell by myself for 23 hours a day for the next 2 months. When I was arraigned, I was astonished to learn that I was being charged with 8 counts of the same charge. In this state, each of these charges comes with a mandatory minimum sentence of 75 months. That's 6 years, 3 months. If convicted of every count, I would have been sentenced to 50 years. If this event had taken place only a few miles away in the next state, which has no mandatory minimums, I would have most likely been released with probation and treatment. I was so naive going into this. I believe in the truth. I still do, with all of my heart. I want to believe in humanity. At the time, I chose to believe in our system of justice. Unfortunately, the system is not set up to handle honest people. It expects the worst in people. It expects people to lie and deny responsibility. The system expects that when it catches someone, the crime that it discovers is only the tip of the criminal iceberg. It assumes that if you were caught doing this, then you must be guilty of a great deal more. It doesn't know how to handle a person who is forthcoming and honest. It makes it so that if you don't lie and deny responsibility, you'll be punished even more. The system can't make adjustments. It's a machine with only one setting. I was punished not for what I did do, but for what the system expected I was trying to hide from it. I know now, with certainty, that if I had lied and denied responsibility for my actions from the very beginning like a true predator would have, I would have never been arrested. I would have never gone to prison. I would have never been labeled as a sex offender. I know this is true. The system got a hold of me and kicked my ass only because I was honest. At the same time, there are so many exploitive predators who are skilled at the game of deception and are rewarded for their behavior with freedom. This screwed up system reinforces the mentality that anything is okay as long as you don't get caught. I soon learned why the prosecutor drummed up so many charges against me. The prosecutor does not want to fight. She lives according to the numbers. Her paycheck and career advancement depend on the numbers of convictions. To advance themselves, they play very, very dirty. Trials take time and money. Plea bargains are quick, systematic. The incredible power of the mandatory minimum sentence structure takes decision-making power away from the judges and gives it to prosecutors who have a bias to gain conviction statistics. If you go to trial and lose, if you are found guilty by the court, the judge has no power of discretion. The judge cannot look at the details of a specific situation and make judgments about the severity of the actual case. Instead, the judge is required by law to issue the mandatory minimum sentence. The prosecutor now stacks charges up against you, a mile high. This way, if you fight and lose on any count, the judge will have to sentence you to the minimum, with no possibility of getting out early for good time. The risk of going to trial becomes way too high. Next, the prosecutor comes at you with a deal. The charges the prosecutor places on you in the beginning are worst case, so the sentence that comes with them are the highest possible. In my case, each came with 75 months. So when she came at me with an offer to change the charges and reduce it to 60 months, it looked really great. This is how it plays out in 95% of all cases. Prosecutors have very high conviction rates because they have so much power to bully guys into plea deals. No one wants to take the risk of going to trial, so 95% of all cases accept a plea deal and then sign the papers that put them in prison. The judge in these cases is only a highly paid paper pusher. In my case, I gave the prosecutor everything she needed. She had me recorded, speaking clearly into the microphone every detail of the situation. I couldn't take my case to trial. I was guaranteed to be found guilty. I had confessed. I was in the hands of the prosecutor. She was my judge. She decided what my sentence should be. Despite a constitutional guarantee to the right of the fair trial, people are not being tried or judged by judges. Prosecutors with ambition and drive, and lawyers are very driven humans. They're driven to advance themselves in the game of domination. They are full of fire. They have no ethical problem climbing up on the backs of others. There is, after all, no law against it. My parents, bless them, they stuck with me all the way through this. It was very hard on them. They paid for an expensive attorney. The first lawyer they called after hearing that I had confessed told my parents that he couldn't take their money because I was in the hands of the prosecutor. There was nothing he could do. They called another. They found a lawyer who was happy to take their money. Well-connected, high-dollar downtown lawyer. She took my parents' money to mitigate the damage. The prosecutor, after months, offered a 60-month plea deal. I was pissed. I knew this couldn't be right. This couldn't be how this is happening. My lawyer suggested we counteroffer. I said, okay, I want time already served and probation. She laughed at me. She did that a lot. She thought I was funny. My lawyer suggested counter-offering was something like 45 months. It seemed like we were buying a house here or something. This is my fucking life. It's difficult to remember the timeline of events. I'm writing this in prison roughly a year after it happened. But at some point, I was pissed at my lawyer. "Why are you not defending me?" I asked her. I grew some balls and fired her. I figured I would threaten to go to trial. The prosecutors don't have time or budgets to go to trial. If only 1% more of cases went to trial, the system would break down because it can't handle the current volume. This machine is locking humans in cages many times its intended volume. The machine is likely to blow up soon. I figured I could go to trial and defend myself and make a mockery of them and their silly game, causing mistrial after mistrial. I didn't feel I had much to lose. I couldn't comprehend spending the next 60 months of my life in prison. That was not even something I thought could ever happen to me. I wasn't going to let them do that to me. That lawyer took my parents' money. Why didn't she fight tooth and nail for me? What is the accepted level of effort applied to save the years of a man's life relative to the amount of money paid? I thought because we paid her, she ought to fight the same way my mother would have fought for me had she been a lawyer, like a mama bear fighting for the life of her cub. Why didn't my lawyer fight for me that way? We paid her. I had to go in front of the judge to be allowed to defend myself, so I was summoned to the court. The judge asked me if I knew what I was doing. I told her that, as I understand it, I have a right to defend myself. I told her that I believe the intent the constitutional writers had in protecting that right is to keep the court in check. They thought that the court system should remain uncomplicated enough that an average person should be fully capable of navigating the system without having to pay an attorney. If the court is too complicated for an average person and a person is forced to pay an attorney, then the system is out of line and out of order. The judge blew me off by quoting some judge's decision in some obscure case. I have no idea what she actually said, and she hit her hammer and I was sent back to hell. Then at some point, my lawyer convinced me to keep working as my consultant. My balls shrunk again, and she was my lawyer again. At one point, we went into mediation with the prosecutor. We all sat in front of a mediating judge and laid it on the table. This is a standard thing to encourage cases to settle out of the courtroom. They're doing everything they can to lighten the strain on the system. My attorney presented her mitigation material, a psychological evaluation and a sexual profile that had been rendered by professionals while I was in the jail, and a lie detector test which showed that I was not a serial monster or a predator. My attorney argued that I had always been compliant and never tried to get out of taking responsibility. With her material, she argued to the mediation judge that 60 months in prison was unreasonable. The judge completely agreed that 60 months was excessive. The judge turned to the prosecutor and told her that this was too much. The prosecutor did not appear to be listening. I remember her checking her phone and playing with her eyeglasses more than I saw her paying attention. It wasn't up to the judge. My lawyer suggested something like 45 months. The prosecutor tugged on a hangnail and reached for her nail file. I was dumbfounded by the way they threw around huge chunks of people's lives. They were so detached from the reality of what they were doing here. This is just another day at work for them. I was just another case. These three probably take their kids to the same soccer club. They traded months of people's lives with each other as favors for trading months with each other in the last case. I've got a little leverage with her, my lawyer told me. I gave her a little room on the last case. No shit, they were horse trading with my life. Just a day at the office. I can remember being maybe 8 or 9 and peering into the engine compartment of our family station wagon while the engine was running and my dad was checking something. You know those old red rags that they always have at gas stations? One of those rags was sitting on top of the radiator. I remember seeing the rag fall into the belt that drove the fan. I thought the engine was going to get all caught up and stop. I was amazed by how quickly and effortlessly the engine devoured the rag. The engine never skipped a beat, kept right on going just like nothing ever happened. The rag was insignificant to the machine. Now I'm the rag, and the court is the engine. It never even knew I existed. I was just another number that was effortlessly devoured. I have no power. I could not bring myself to accept the offer. I could not bring myself to sign the papers agreeing to put myself in prison. It just felt all wrong. When you don't know what to do, do nothing. I believe in this philosophy. If you are lost and you don't know the way, it is far better not to make any move until you gain more clarity. Because of all of the directional possibilities, it is more likely that you will choose the wrong direction and make yourself more lost. A panicked or quick decision is more likely to be the wrong decision. Just sit and do as much of nothing as possible until your quieted mind can hear a whisper from the universe and you have clearly found a rational strategy. Doing nothing for me sometimes includes not eating. I can get myself very, very quiet while listening to the universe for guidance. Doing nothing, including reducing my breathing, is a meditative tactic for seeking answers which come from the universe, but quietly and through the heart. I fasted. It was not difficult. The food was easy to not eat, and the stress I was under made me feel zero appetite. I went without food for 7 days. The prosecutor made an offer of 54 months with the possibility to earn 20% time off for good behavior. The offer was on the table for 48 hours. I mentioned to my lawyer that I was fasting when she came to present this offer from the prosecutor. For 7 days, the guards never noticed that I had not eaten. Now that my lawyer told them, there was a guard at my door asking me questions. He wanted to know if I was suicidal. I assured him that I was not. I told him that I am a man of conviction, that I have a resolute belief system, and that I am compelled to fight for what I believe in. He gave me funny looks. I put it into terms that I thought a militant man could understand. When a young man joins the military during wartime to fight for his country, knowing that he will likely be harmed or even killed, do you consider him to be suicidal? I told him that during the Revolutionary War, several thousand American revolutionaries had been captured by the British and imprisoned in ships in the Boston Harbor. The conditions were horrific. The British offered to release anyone who would swear allegiance to the king and promise to never pick up a weapon against him again. As many as 10,000 prisoners rejected this offer and willingly chose to starve to death. The guard just looked at me with a blank stare. I had, of course, decided to accept the 54-month offer. I felt very clear that I had a fight to wage, but it was going to be way more effective for me to fight from the outside. No battle can be waged from in prison. They make sure of that. They silence you and literally censor you. I wanted to fight, but I told myself that if I went to prison for years and years, I would reduce my ability to wage that war. I knew I had a story to write, so I told myself I would write my story while I was in prison. I was also very scared. I was truly unsure if I would survive any prison time. I was truly afraid for my life. I knew there was a very real possibility of being killed in prison. It happens there. This is true terror being administered by your government. Terrorism. I told my lawyer to accept the deal, and we were in court the next day. During the signing of the plea deal, my lawyer asked if I had been eating, and I told her I had. After the signing, instead of going back to the jail, I was taken to the psychiatric ward for suicidal watch. Holy shit. I was put into a 24-hour lockdown suicide watch. This tiny room was horrible beyond description. It was about half the size of a regular cell and completely barren. There was a really gross toilet that smelled like raw sewage. It had been badly abused and never cleaned. It was plugged with full rolls of sewage-soaked toilet paper. There was no mattress, only a slightly raised concrete pad to sit on. I did not want to touch anything. I was stuck in this awful place for several hours. Every 15 minutes or so, someone would look through a small window in the door and ask if I was okay. The staff were harsh and cold. This place was absolutely insane. It was clear that this room was meant to be so uncomfortable that a suicidal prisoner would be inclined to change his mind and want to cooperate so they could go back to the comfort of regular jail and stop wasting the time of the cops. After several hours, the door opened and a counselor came in and started asking me questions. Do you want to kill yourself? No. Do you have any history of depression? Only as long as my history with being held captive. What do you mean? I'm being held captive, against my will. Do you expect me to be happy about that? Well, no, but we can't have you hurting yourself. Right, only you are allowed to hurt me. Do I have the right to disagree with what's being done to me? Do I have the right to non-violent protest? Okay, I understand it's not a fun place. I don't expect you to enjoy yourself here. I just need to make sure you're well enough to return to your regular cell. Was Patrick Henry mentally ill when he said, "Give me liberty or give me death"? I got more funny looks. The counselor was not completely apathetic, but he was incapable of doing anything. He can only work within the parameters of his job description, like a little robot. After he decided that I didn't want to kill myself, I was transported back to regular jail. It was a mind-blowing realization that the chaos of the dorm was actually a step up from this place. This had been the dungeon beneath the dungeon. On my trip back to the jail, I finally had some time to reflect on the plea bargain song and dance that took place earlier in the day. I had been frustrated by all the phony ceremony. There had been a bunch of speech that was all for show, followed by a bunch of conversation about me as if I weren't standing in the room or like I was incapable of speaking. The prosecutor explained to the judge how I needed to be punished, and my lawyer told the judge how I should be getting off easier. None of it meant anything. The deal had already been agreed upon. The judge was not the decider anyway. She was only a paper signer. The paperwork was placed in front of me. I read what it said. The paper said I was agreeing to 2 charges. This second one was news to me. No one had told me there was a second charge. It was a deferred sentence, which meant I was agreeing to 10 years of probation for attempted unlawful penetration. I was furious. This did not happen. There was no penetration. There was no attempt to penetrate. I am not agreeing to this. This was snuck in. Shitty last-second lawyer tricks. I was ready to call this all off and go back to my jail cell. Eventually, the judge asked me if I was sane and coherent and capable of making decisions. She asked me if I understood what was going on. Then she asked me if I was signing this agreement under my own will or if I was doing so because I was being threatened. I looked at the judge and told her that I didn't agree with any of it. I was only signing this because my life was being threatened. The judge looked surprised. She asked who it was that was threatening me. I told her that I am afraid for my life and that the prosecutor had clearly and directly threatened that if I do not accept her offer, I will receive a much longer prison sentence and even more of my life will be taken from me. I said that I am only signing this because I am forced, My life is under threat. The judge shrugged off my comments and moved forward anyway. A few days later, I found myself chained up and thrown into the back of a box van. I was transferred to the state prison intake facility. After my recent experience being surrounded by a mob of hostile thugs, I was certain my life was in danger. I was receiving many lessons in the experience of terror, lessons that are being taught deliberately and systematically by your government. This feeling of impending demise was grounded in reality. I was not overreacting. In America's prisons, a person is subjected to the possibility of being attacked or even killed every day. The judges and lawyers and cops who are doing this to me have never been subjected to the same terror that they administer. I can tell you what terror feels like because I've lived it. The experience of terror was given to me by the United States government. I arrived to the intake center chained to several other captives and in the back of a box van, not too different from the type of van animal control uses when it collects stray dogs. We were escorted to a holding tank where we sat for several hours. Most of my counterparts were chatty. For a lot of guys, talking loudly as a way to vent the tension inside of them. I said nothing. They swapped stories. A couple of them were having a discussion. They were trying to decide how much risk they were putting themselves in because of the drugs they had stuffed into their buttholes at that very moment. One of them decided it was way too risky and he decided to take a poop. There was a toilet with no walls or door just sitting in the corner of the holding tank. The small room got even smaller. Eventually, we were ordered into a processing room. We were stripped and searched. Standing naked in front of the guard, he barked orders at me. Hands up. Let me see between your fingers. Shake out your hair. Let me see behind your ears. Open your mouth. Stick out your tongue. Okay, hands down. Lift up your nuts. Turn around. Show me the bottoms of your feet. Grab your butt cheeks. Squat. Spread those butt cheeks. Cough. Cough harder. Okay, take a shower. This was humiliating. I've never been treated this way in my life. What the fuck is wrong with these people? The squatting, coughing, butthole inspection is, I guess, meant to find contraband hidden inside the body cavity, but it doesn't work. The guy who I knew had drugs in his butt, he had no difficulty passing this inspection. I doubt that any bag of drugs has ever fallen on the floor or been discovered, even if the prisoner had diarrhea. The guards know this. They know drugs are constantly making it into the prison this way and that they are not slowing it down at all. But they do this inspection anyway, to everyone, and regularly to all captives throughout the entire prison experience. It's a way of asserting dominance. Sexual dominance. After being systematically humiliated, questioned, photographed again, it was then to DNA swabbing and fingerprinting again. I had the feeling of walls closing in on me. I have nothing to hide. My DNA will never be found in any place that it was not welcomed. But this was a violating intrusion. I am now officially no longer a human being. I am a piece of property owned by the state, reduced to a serial number. My life does not belong to me. While being fingerprinted, I had my first opportunity to interact with a guard out of hearing from the other prisoners. I quietly told the guy who was manhandling my hands that I was afraid for my life. I asked him if there was anything that could be done for my safety. He paused a moment, then he looked at me and said, "Yeah, there is. Man up." My heart sank. At the next stop, a nurse was drawing blood and issuing TB tests. I had another semi-private moment and I thought perhaps she might be able to tell me who I could talk to. My voice was quiet and shaky. I told her I was really scared. I asked her who I could talk to in order to gain some kind of personal safety in this place. She looked at me with sympathetic eyes but said nothing. Then a gruff man's voice shouted, "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" It was the same guy who had told me to man up. He came around the corner and shouted at me. "We don't tolerate shoppers around here. You get to keep the first answer you're given. You think you can take advantage of my nurse?" After being processed like a cow heading to the slaughter, I was directed to a cell. My cellmate was not there, which gave me a little bit of relief, but only prolonged the suspense of not knowing who I was going to be trapped in here with. Later that evening, he showed up. He was a soft-spoken Hispanic guy. He told me he had volunteered to be a unit orderly. He cleaned and did laundry so that he could spend more time out of his cell. I felt relief that he was not hostile. For some reason, the Hispanic prisoners are, for the most part, more accepting and less hostile. They don't usually make a big thing out of people's charges. He did ask me, but I was vague and he didn't press for any more information. About an hour after I entered the cell for the first time, the automated door popped open and I heard the unit guard call my name. I went down and he told me that the lieutenant wanted to see me. I was ordered to enter an office and told to sit. 2 men came in. The first guy I recognized as the one who had yelled at me and told me to man up. The second was a huge, intense-looking black man whom I took to be the lieutenant. Both men entered the small office as if they were prepared for battle. Their chests were puffed out. They walked with bow-legged swagger and with clenched fists and jaws. They both had high, tight, crew-cut hair and drill sergeant personalities. These are militants, inside and out. I immediately understood that I was about to be put in my place. "What's this I hear about you shopping my staff for the answer you want instead of taking the answer you get?" "I did no such thing. I'm afraid for my life, sir, and I'm trying to figure out how to survive." He sat forward in his chair. "Well, I'm going to tell you a few things. Pay attention." Looked to me as if he was going to enjoy this. "You're going to have to learn to walk like a man. There are men in here who, if you give them the chance, they'll beat you. There are men in here who are going to want to rape you." He was beginning to work himself up. His eyes were starting to bulge out of his head. This guy is intense. Spit was flying out of his mouth while he talked. It was clear to me that this prison, and this man's position within the prison, was providing him with some kind of deeply rooted erotic pleasure. He is in love with the toughness of this place. He clearly loved that he had power and control over such a tough place. Like it somehow validated him because he was tougher than the toughest of places. He was here to tell me that this is his prison. He was telling me that this is how things work here, and they work this way because it's how he likes it, and it's going to stay that way, and I'm going to have to accept it and fall into my place. It was clear that he thought I was trash. He stopped just short of saying so. His rant continued on. "You gotta man up." He was pretty much yelling at me now. "You did the crime, now you gotta do the time. This is how it is." I sat in disbelief. I said, "I did not do anything that warrants being locked in a cage with a pissed-off, knuckle-dragging gorilla with a 3-year-old's logic. If you lock me in a cage with a gorilla and I get my ass beat, that's on you. You are responsible for that, not me. This is clearly your prison. You are responsible for what goes on here. These are your cages. You are responsible for who you put in them, and you are responsible for what goes on in them. You are in control here. You decide my fate. You are responsible for my safety." Upon hearing this, the lieutenant got quiet for a second. He looked at Mr. Man Up, asked him to close the door. The bulging veins in his forehead looked like they were about to explode. He began again. "Look, this is prison. You should have thought about this before you did what you did. I bet you felt like a man then. Now, you got no choice but to learn to be a real man. You got to pay the price. You got to learn to walk upright." He nearly screamed this rant at me. "Why are you threatening me? I can tell when I'm being threatened. I'm still a human being. I have the right to be treated fairly, and I have the right to be safe. This calmed him down just a little bit. He sat back in his chair and collected his thoughts. Look, he says, this is just the way it is here. People are going to want to hurt you. There's only so much I can do about that. You're going to have to figure out how to survive on your own. I expected his sentence to finish, like a man. This guy is in love with his manhood. Then I said, so it's your prison, you are in command here, but you don't have any real control? You're telling me that you're not going to do anything to ensure prisoner safety, that things are the way you like them to be? Are you telling me that I have to fight in order to protect myself? This put him on his heels. He had to think for a second. Of course he thinks fighting is what a real man would do, but he would lose his job if he advocated his true belief. There's a big gap here he had to navigate. The administrators encourage prisoners to work out their own issues, which means bullies run the prison. The staff enable and encourage the atmosphere here. They know it's a violent place. They love it this way. They get off on it being this way. If things are this way, they have an excuse to flex their dominance when violence inevitably breaks out. Yes, he is encouraging me to fight it out, but he can't say that openly. The lieutenant gave the official DOC response. No, you can't fight. Fighting will land you in the hole, will cost you good time, and will possibly get you new assault charges. You just gotta learn to walk upright, like a man. I had the feeling I was trying to engage in intellectual battle with a goat. I knew this was going nowhere and I wanted out. Yeah, I get it. You think I should be more like you. With your toughness, you are the master of your own existence. I don't think that being hard makes you a man at all. I hear you, I get what you're saying. I understand how it works, and I understand that things are exactly as you like them to be. But there is no benefit for either of us in continuing this conversation, so I would like to be done. But first, I want you to know that I hold you, Lieutenant, personally responsible for my safety. With that, I was done. I had nothing else to say. He had a few other things to say. I'm sure he felt he needed to have the last word to make sure he felt in charge of the situation. This man is doing more than just collecting a paycheck. He is absolutely in love with what he's doing here. He is getting an emotional fix from all of this. Eventually, I was told to go back to my cell. The lieutenant belongs to a fraternity. These guys validate each other and work to expand their way of life. Prosecutors, judges, law enforcers, and jailers feed their emotional imbalances and feed their families through the industry of inflicting dominance and suffering upon the people they work with. They pursue and lobby to expand their industry in order to preserve and expand the codependent relationship they are dependent on. They need to shit on people because they're out of balance. Their personal imbalance generates tension and emotional heat which must be expressed. The whole thing is so childish, it would be funny, except they have wrangled the power to really hurt people, and to hurt humanity. These people who self-identify as good guys do not consciously know it, but they're both the victims and the perpetrators of oppression. Someone abused the lieutenant. He embraced the flawed logic that the perpetrator of his abuse used to try to make it right and normalize it. That flawed logic now resides in his subconscious mind and combines with the negative emotional energy that is being constantly generated from his personal imbalance. His world makes perfect, logical, rational sense to him because he accepted his imbalanced existence so long ago. It's the only way of existing that he has ever known. Nothing else makes sense to him. Nothing else feels right. The lieutenant truly believes he is making the world a better place by manufacturing human suffering. People like the lieutenant, his fraternity brothers, are working very hard to lobby lawmakers and instill fear into the hearts of the voting citizen. Imbalance is insatiable. It is a thirst which can never be quenched. No amount of power or control or domination will ever make the lieutenant feel okay or at peace. Peace and contentment only come in a state of balance. Balance can never be achieved by perpetuating the imbalance of a codependent dynamic. Those who seek domination will never achieve contentment. There is no such thing as enough power or dominance. They will always need more. The police fraternity are constantly lobbying lawmakers and the voting public to give them more power and more funding to expand their efforts. They use fear-mongering to try to compel the fearful into giving up more freedoms. The cops always need another new weapon, a new helicopter, better handcuffs, more prisons, so that they can better wage war against their fellow humans. The police fraternity are emotionally and economically invested in their way of doing business. They are not objective. They cannot see it clearly from the outside. Their way of life and their paycheck depends on validating and expanding their industry. I spent about a month in the intake facility. Nothing was ever explained. I was given no indication what was going to be done to me. This place was terrifying. The tension in the air was so thick, was heavy, oppressive. The atmosphere was nearly unbearable. Every person who enters the state prison system is processed in this factory building. There is every level of prisoner in here. The guys who face the longest sentences usually act the craziest. These guys had been robbed of hope. They had nothing to live for and nothing to lose. We were locked in 2-person cells for 23 hours a day. Being locked down did not stop the communication or the harassment. There was constant yelling from cell to cell. Guys would go cell number by cell number. Hey, cell 24, what are your charges? Everyone was being sized up. The yelling went on well into the night and began again early first thing in the morning. Hey, everyone, the guy in 16, he's a child molester. They were just a bunch of scared children trying to cope with their own heavy emotions. At this facility, they issued all kinds of tests and examinations. They determined every prisoner's custody level, which dictates what kind of prison facility they will be warehoused in. If a guy can do math or read, his custody level goes up. It was determined that my custody level was the lowest possible. I was going to minimum security facility. After they tally the test scores, they compute a number which is supposed to represent the likelihood that a prisoner will end up back in the prison after he has been released. This has got to be a joke, right? It was decided that I was 4% likely to end up back in prison. Okay. Thanks, I guess. Finally, they gave me an official release date, which automatically assumes the prisoner will earn his 20% off for good time. If I am good, if I am an obedient soldier, I will be released in January of 2016, 3 years from now. That is too far away for me to see any light at the end of this tunnel. I cannot comprehend that distance. Early one morning I was woken for transport. Here we go. I had no idea where I was being taken. All the prisoners were involved in heavy speculation over where they would be sent. This uncertainty was a heavy source of anxiety. There were plenty of rumors about the places you did not want to be sent. I didn't know what my future was going to be. I was chained up and put into the back of a crowded van. The van stopped at a minimum security facility in an old rundown building that looked like it had been built in the 1920s. The rumor is that the building had been condemned several years earlier, but that the DOC doesn't have the money to build a new one or to fix this one. Instead, they pay an annual fine for occupying a condemned building. I don't know if this is true, but the building looks like it could be true. I was sent to a large room with bunks stuffed into every corner. I would estimate that there were around 150 men living in this chaotic room. The moment I walked in, I could feel everyone's eyes on me.
A guard told me where my bunk was. When I got there, the guys in the area stopped their horseplay and began asking me questions. They wanted to know where I was coming from, how long I had been down, and how long I had left to go. Most importantly, are you a sex offender? I didn't know the best way to handle this. I knew I was going to have to live with this for the next 3 years. It seemed best to try to lie, but I'm a really shitty liar, and I don't know what to say. I'm brand new to this. Besides, they can see I'm not like them. I had heard that these guys will ask people to look up other prisoners' charges. I didn't think I had any chance of going unnoticed. They make it their business to know other people's business, kind of like the cops do. I told them my charges were none of their business. This told them exactly what my charges were. One of them looked directly at the guy occupying the lower bunk under mine. He made a big dramatic scene. "Oh man, that totally sucks for you, dude. Oh man, I'm so sorry. Dude, you got screwed." A short time later, that same vocal guy, he was really a kid, he followed me into the bathroom. He asked me if I was sure I didn't want to tell him what my charges were. I told him I didn't care what his charges were, and he didn't need to know what mine were. He said, "Okay, you can play it that way, but that's going to get you in trouble." I chose a moment when there was no prisoners at the guard's desk. I approached him and told him I had been there for 3 hours and was already being harassed. The guard stared at me, dumbfounded. He glanced around the room to see how many prisoners were watching this exchange. Then he said under his breath, "You're only going to make it worse by talking to me." I couldn't believe it. He said he would write them up, but it won't do any good, and I will just get labeled as a rat. I asked him what I was supposed to do. He explained to me the meal schedule. He wanted to do me the favor of making the conversation sound like a legitimate one. I lay on my bunk that night, fully awake, terrified. Again. Terror. I was shaken by a guard at 5 a.m. He said I was being transported. As it turned out, this place was never my intended destination. This was only a layover for logistical reasons. I was a package caught up in shipping and receiving, on my way to be warehoused at the proper facility. I felt briefly relieved to be leaving this place, but at the same moment, a new uncertainty for the place I was really going to. Back into chains. I mean full-on body and leg chains, the same kind of chains you would buy at a hardware store, and a keyed padlock like you'd use on your storage shed. Back into a packed van, this time for 7 hours. It took 2 weeks for the bruises and the cuts to heal on my ankles and wrists. 7 hours is a long way for your friends and family to travel. I won't get many visits out here. I arrived at my new home on December 12th, 2012. 12/12/12. Doomsday. After being processed and issued clothing and bedding, I was ordered into a dorm and assigned a bunk. The room is large and wide open. It's a big rectangle with tall ceilings, about the size of a medium-sized gymnasium. Bunks are arranged around the perimeter of the outer walls. The facility is fairly new, which automatically made it feel better than where I stayed the night. But this place is constructed cheaply. There are about 100 men living in this room. When I walked in, I could immediately feel the eyes upon me. The guard, a young woman, told me where my bunk was. As I walked, I could feel the eyes following me. Once again, within 60 seconds of finding my bunk, I was approached. "Are you a sex offender?" After my experience at the last place, I felt defeated. Said yes. Once he figured out that I was coming directly from the intake facility and had no news for him from any other facilities, he had no further use for me. He gave me a quick rundown about how it was going to be. You guys have those 2 tables over there. Always right in front, right on display. I looked out at the 16 or so tables in the center of the day use area. He continued on. Other than those 2 tables, you can't sit anywhere. I looked at the long tables around the whole perimeter of the day room. You can sit and watch TV in the day room, but you can only sit on the back row. And don't try to talk anyone who's not a sex offender. I wouldn't want to see you get in a wreck. Okay, man. Thanks for keeping it real.